Good evening, everyone. It's my special pleasure to welcome you this evening to the historic nave of the Riverside Church in the city of New York. I'm Amy Butler. I'm the senior minister, and we are so happy that you are here. I hope you can feel the sacred spirit in this place. Exactly 1 year before Dr. King died, he delivered from this chancel his iconic speech, Beyond Vietnam, Breaking the Silence, where he called us to confront deep and systemic problems in our society to make a fundamental and permanent change. We gather here tonight in the spirit of his witness to atone for what we have done, killing and suppressing the voices that are calling us to justice, and then to march from this place to finish the job. We're so very glad that you're here tonight. This evening, I have the pleasure of introducing a leader in the fight for equal justice, our governor, Governor Cuomo. The governor has dedicated his life to public service and worked to create a more equal society where all New Yorkers have the opportunity to succeed regardless of race, creed, or color. The governor's leadership, and this is true, has never been more necessary than it is now. With a hostile federal government that is trying to undermine the values that we hold dear every day, the governor continues to uphold the legacy of Dr. King and his crusade for equal rights. So please join me in welcoming a true friend, advocate, and national leader, the 56th governor of New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. First to Reverend Dr. Butler. Let's give her a round of applause for her leadership and all the great work she's done. They told me before I came not to speak about politics, but now that the Reverend mentioned the federal government, the door is open and the horse is out. We also have with us today Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul. Let's give her a round of applause. My brother Hank Newsom, president of Black Lives Matter. And the great speakers for tonight, Reverend Sadler, Arthur McFarland, and Ambassador Susan Johnson Cook, who I knew when she was just Reverend Susan Johnson Cook, but now she's an ambassador. Let's give them a round of applause. It is an honor to be in this historic church. You feel the spirit of Dr. King, you feel the inspiration. When I worked in the federal government, I had a great opportunity at one time. One Martin Luther King Day, Mrs. Coretta Scott King called me up and asked me if I would go down and give the Martin Luther King address in Atlanta, in Dr. King's church, Ebenezer Baptist Church, which was the highest honor. And I spent weeks and weeks preparing for this speech on MLK Day. And I learned so much about Dr. King. And the more you read and the more you learn, the more inspirational he is and the deeper his thinking is. But there are a couple of themes that stayed with me. One, that justice is a journey, it's not a destination. Like the pursuit of a more perfect union, like the pursuit of a more perfect self. You never fully adjust society. It is always a work in progress. Second, most of all, he always spoke about justice as an active pursuit. The arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, not coincidentally. The arc is bent by good people doing what good people need to do and exerting force and bending that arc towards justice. Today we have a federal government that is actively bending the arc the other way. It is a federal government that spreads division, it spreads fear, it spreads anger. It's sad that the human condition responds easier to a message of hate than to a message of love. They use the anger, they manipulate the anger. They suggest a solution for one's problems is at the expense of another. People feel pain, give them a simple target. The immigrants caused it. People of different religions caused it. People with different skin colors caused it. Demonize the differences. That's what they do. More anti-Semitism than ever before over the past 2 years. More neo-Nazi groups being formed than ever before over the past 2 years. Charlottesville, white supremacists gather, and the federal government says, well, there were people, good people on both sides. No, my friends, by definition, there are no good white supremacists, period. They are unleashing a social cancer, cells fighting cells in the body politic, attacking the strength of our body, which is diversity, and making it a weakness. This is the antithesis of what Dr. King taught us. He believed in collective success. He believed that poor lives matter, and black lives matter, and brown lives matter, and LGBTQ lives matter, and all lives matter. He believed in a spirit of community, and he believed that there was a cord that connected me to you, to you, to you, to you, and maybe the cord was invisible, but that cord weaved a fabric. And we were bound, and when one of us is raised, we are all raised, and when one of us is lowered, we are all lowered. Dr. King said we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. The federal teaching is not only opposite Dr. King, it is also anti-American. It's the exact opposite of what the Statue of Liberty stands for and Emma Lazarus's poem. It's the exact opposite of the words that are inscribed on the seal on the flag that hangs behind the president's desk. The founding fathers said, "E pluribus unum." Out of many, one. We were a land of immigrants, and the challenge for America was to form one community from that diversity. Dr. King also taught us to do what you can do when you can do it. Strive to make progress at all times. Lead by example. Criticize the wrong, but also show the alternative. Work for the more perfect union and do it here and now. And to do that, you have to start with the truth, because denial is not a life strategy, and you will never solve a problem you are unwilling to admit. So I say to you tonight, as governor of the great state of New York, discrimination, my friends, is alive and well in America today. I worked in the Clinton administration as HUD secretary. I enforced the Fair Housing Act, which was a law that was passed inspired by Dr. King's life. And we brought cases in some parts of the country against the Ku Klux Klan, who had the audacity to have their own TV show on public access, where they would sit there in their robes and their pointy hats, spewing their filth. We brought a case against a group. A Portuguese woman moved into a home. They planted a 7-foot cross on her lawn and they burned it. Why? Because she was Portuguese. They thought she was black. We brought a case against an apartment complex. There are 2 swimming pools, one for the blacks and one for the whites. I worked on the black church burnings down south. Brutal, obvious discrimination. Now in New York, our discrimination is not as brutal. It's not as open. But it's in some ways more insidious and in some ways more dangerous. It exists. It exists in housing, employment, banking, criminal justice system. It exists in the people who are trying to work for a living. A majority of minimum wage workers are minorities. Minimum wage was $9 an hour. $9 an hour in the city of New York. You can't pay for your rent and pay for food and raise a family on $18,000 a year. You can't do it. That's why we raised it to $15, the highest rate in the nation. But it's also about accumulating wealth and growing businesses. And that's why programs like the Minority Women in Business Enterprise program are so important. And we have the highest goal here in the country at 30% to use that government money to build businesses and build enterprises and actually develop wealth. Dr. King said, I'm going to get there. Dr. King said a host of positive psychological changes inevitably will result from widespread economic security. The dignity of the individual will flourish when the decisions concerning his life are in his own hands and when he has the means to seek self-improvement. Unemployment among minority youth, 42.8%. 42.8%. That's why we need more job vouchers and more training, because we have people who were failed by an education system and now have no place to go and no alternatives. Let's talk about housing. 1949, the United States of America pledged a safe, clean, decent home for every American. 1949. 1966, Dr. King said at the Chicago Housing Authority, "We are here today because we are tired. We are tired of being treated in the flames of withering injustice. We are tired of paying more for less. We are tired of living in rat-infested slums." 1966. Leave this church today and go to a New York City Housing Authority complex that hasn't had heat, that doesn't have running water, that has mold, that has mildew, that has lead paint in the apartments, that was outlawed in 1970. But we still have lead paint in these apartments. And the New York City Housing Authority says it's going to take us 4 years to replace a boiler. Let me ask you this. If there were privileged and wealthy people living in that public housing, do you think it would take 4 years to change a boiler? We have discrimination in the criminal justice system. If you look at Lady Liberty, she has Lady Justice. She has a blindfold and she's holding the scales of justice. Blindfold. She doesn't see skin color. Holding the scales of justice. It's just about merit. Is it really? We have a bail system that works on cash payment. And if you go before a judge and you can pay bail, you walk. And if you can't pay bail, then you sit. That's not justice. We need a bail system that money doesn't matter. Let the judge make the decision on the merits, And if you should stay, you stay. If you should walk, you should walk, whether you're black or white, or you are rich or brown. Black or brown. If you can't make bail, they send you to Rikers Island. Rikers Island, close to 90% minority. Over 75% of the people on Rikers Island have been convicted of nothing. They are awaiting trial, convicted of nothing. The worst jail in the state of New York, more assaults, more deaths, more harm to staff than any other jail. Federal government came and said it's a civil rights violation and it should be closed down. You know how long they say it's going to take to close it down, to build a new jail? 10 years. 10 years. It's taking me 4 years to build a new LaGuardia airport. It's taking me 5 years to build the largest infrastructure project in the United States, a new bridge across the Hudson River. How can it take 10 years to build a jail if you really wanted to build a new jail? If those were the children of the powerful and the rich, you would see how fast they would close Rikers Island and they would build a new jail. There's discrimination in our education system. We have two education systems, not public and private, one for the rich and one for the poor. And you go to a school on the rich side of town, and they'll show you how in kindergarten they're on the internet. And you go to a school on the poor side of town, and they'll show you they don't even have a basketball net. You go to a school on the rich side of town, and they'll show you how they have fancy computers. You go to a school on the poor side of town, and the most sophisticated piece of electronic equipment is the metal detector that you walk through on the way to the classroom. That's not justice, and that's not Dr. King's justice. We spend more money per pupil in this state than any state in the United States of America. The question is, where does it go? Some schools get $11,000 per pupil. Some schools get $33,000 per pupil. How can that be? You're condemned by your zip code and your neighborhood. And it is about rich versus poor, and black versus white, and minorities versus white. It has to end. It has to end now. Just the way we have income inequality, we have education inequality, and we have to end it now. "64 years after Brown versus Board of Education, we still have two education systems. Dr. King said we are tired of inferior and segregated and overcrowded schools, which are incapable of preparing our young people for leadership and security in this technological age. We have the same failing schools for over 3 generations. And we keep sending child after child after child. And what we're doing this year is, before we give out an education dollar, we want to know exactly how that money is going to be distributed to every school that's getting it, and we're going to make sure it's distributed fairly. Dr. King said, "It is precisely because education is the road to equality and citizenship that it has been made more elusive for Negroes than any other rights. The walling off of Negroes from equal education is part of the historical design to submerge him in the second-class status." And finally, there's the issue of gun violence. 50 years ago, we lost Dr. King. During that period of time, 1.5 million lives have been lost to gun violence. The young people get it. The March for Life gets it. Young people are showing more leadership than the elected leaders in Washington. It's a question of common sense. It's just common sense. And the NRA has a grip on those Washington leaders and won't release it. In New York, after Sandy Hook, which was the massacre in Connecticut, we passed the toughest gun laws in the country, and we said if we don't act, it's going to happen again. And it happened again and again and again, and now we have the massacre in Florida, and if they don't finally enact sensible gun laws, you're going to see it happen again, and there's going to be no excuse this time. Use common sense. Forget the NRA. You represent the people of the USA, and let's pass real gun violence. Dr. King said, when a nation becomes obsessed with the guns of war, it loses its social perspective. We have. In closing, my friends, the Spirit lives. It lives in this church. But the Spirit must not just live in our hearts. It must live in our actions. Don't lose the outrage. Apathy is the handmaiden of injustice. Speak up, speak out. Cure the Washington darkness, but light the beacon of New York to show the way forward. Thank you, and God bless you.